are listening to the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network. Follow us by visiting MikeRileyNow.com. All right, and welcome to the Mike Riley Now podcast here on the Young Angels of America Network. I'm your host, Mike Riley, and I'm usually joined by my lovely co-hosts, Cameron Robson and Charlie Sandy, but tonight they had to study for finals because they're still in school and they still got school stuff to do. So we're going to wish them a lot of luck on their finals, and you girls study hard and, pass all them classes and whatnot. Today is Thursday, December 8th, 2016. And a lot has been going on. But before we jump into it, I definitely want to start out by thanking all of my new subscribers. I've been getting tons of new subscribers this week, lots of good reviews. So I want to thank you guys all for that. Please tell all your friends about it. Spread the word. Log on to MikeRileyNow.com and make sure you follow us on all the, social media stuff, the Instagrams, the Twitters, the Facebooks, and all that cool stuff. Yeah, man, my Instagram is getting kind of cool. I got to give myself some props. So if you haven't checked out my Instagram yet, do yourself a favor. The handle is at Mike Riley Now. I am such a shameless promoter of my own material. It's not even funny. I'm going to start wearing T-shirts with my face on it. So let's jump into it tonight. I don't have a co-host, but I have some guests. Of course, I have Britt Dockery in the house, and I have my man Joshua. Joshua, what's your last name?
Fishman.
Joshua Fishman is in the building tonight. Good man. So we got a little bit of a live audience. So thank God for them. All right. Been somewhat of an interesting week. Oh, and by the way, before I jump right into it, in the third segment of our show tonight, we are going to have a very special guest, Miss Peggy Moore, who ran for City-Council in the city of Oakland, will be joining us tonight. And so I'm really excited about that. So stay tuned for our third segment. So a lot's been going on this week. So much has been going on. It's kind of hard to unravel. I mean, everything from since the last time we spoke last week, it's just been a roller coaster from Donald Trump's cabinet picks, from picking Linda McMahon to head the SPA, to picking, I forget the guy's name, who's going to be heading the EPA, but he's a climate change denier. And then, of course, we have, what's my man's name? He's the CEO of like Carl's Jr. and like Wendy's, or not Wendy's, but Hardee's, Andrew Putzer, I think his name is, or something like that. But he's going to be he's going to be the Secretary of Labor. And this is a guy who's completely against like minimum wage increases, and he thinks that hurts small business. So this has been a pretty interesting week. And on top of that, there's been all this talk too about this conflict of interest that's been going on within the Trump administration about him not actually putting his assets into a blind trust, about having his family take care of it. And he was saying that that's a blind trust during the campaign, which means he probably doesn't know what a blind trust is. And all of these things. And then there's what's been happening at the Dakota Access Pipeline. Plus there's this recount thing that's been going on in the battleground states with Jill Stein. And that's been causing all this ruckus. And amidst all this stuff that's been happening, I've been turning on the TV this week, just trying to get back into media. And I see this discussion happening with Van Jones on Tuesday night. And I think it's called The Dirty Truth or something. Is that what it was called? I don't know if anybody, fact check me on that if you can, if you're out there in TV land. But he had the Dirty Truth was Van Jones' way of creating a bit of a kumbaya within our country. Because one of the things that he opened the show with actually was we as a nation, and I was talking to my man Josh here earlier, where he had brought up about how we are talking past each other, completely past each other for some, not for some reason, but there's this, we talk about this all the time on this show about how there's this great divide about, we talked about this pretty much in depth last week about how one side just sees the other side as just completely wrong, right? And amidst all this, he brought on different people to kind of explain their views, and it was kind of like a town hall where other people got the opportunity to ask questions back and stuff like that. And it really kind of took me for a spin, just kind of hearing some of the topics they were talking about. and kind of how they were avoiding some of the issues. Like one of I think it was when Rick Perry was in the crowd. One of the guys that was sitting down, he was one of the ones that I think got his job saved through the carrier deal that Donald Trump and Mike Pence put together in Indiana. And the guy was like, oh, you know, my job got saved because of Donald Trump. And, you know, I really think he's been doing his thing. And, you know, and Van Jones just was kind of like, yeah, okay, sure. I can see that kind of. I mean, he didn't give in easy, but, you know, and Rick Perry kind of explained, you know, see, he's doing good. And look, he's going to drain this, you know, he's going to clean this up and clean that up. And, you know, they failed to mention, you know, how Donald Trump was able to keep only, 700 something jobs, not 1,100 like he claimed, in the country by pretty much bribing Carrier to stay here with taxpayer money. That's not what he campaigned on. But that didn't take me for a loop as much as the other kind of topic they were discussing, which was racism. And during that discussion of racism, you know, it really kind of jolted me a little bit because, you know, we the truth of the matter is, you know, America, for all intents and purposes, and you can argue this with me as much as you want, America is a racist country. We were embedded in racism. It's in our fabric. It's in our DNA. There is no such thing as you don't see color if you live in this country. It slaps you in the face every day. And the way race is being talked about in this country these days has just going to show the evolution of how much of a problem it still really is. And how do we get past this race thing? Where does it come from? Why does it still exist? One of the big talking points during the campaign was racism, right? And I'm going to attack the left a little bit here for a second. Yes, there was a lot of racism going on the right, especially during the rallies and things like that. But the left made it a point to use that as one of the biggest talking points. You can't vote for them. You can't do this because they're racist. Racist. And then when the conservatives hear these types of things, there's this backlash. There is just, I'm not racist. I just think people need to take personal responsibility for their own, you know, problems and, and this and that. And how could you call Donald Trump a racist and a sexist? He just put a black guy, you know, in his cabinet, Ben Carson and Nikki Haley and all these other people. So it's kind of hard to back up that argument and sit there and point and say somebody's a racist when, from a logistical standpoint, conservatives are just pointing out things and saying, no, I'm not. Look at, you know, I'm not a racist. Blah, blah, blah. You know, you hear it all the time. As a matter of fact, during this week, there was also a lot of a hype around this girl. I think her name is Tommy Lauren. I think I'm probably saying her name wrong. I say everybody's name wrong, by the way, so don't judge me. But this is she's a millennial. She's about 24 or 25 or something like that. And she's a conservative commentator who has really strong conservative views. You know, she's a really cute girl, so she gets a lot of attention online. But in the hindsight of things, her views, like she compared Black Lives Matter to the KKK. She has said things like, I can't even begin to explain. You got to Google search it and kind of look. But she's been on all these, I think she went on Trevor Noah's show a couple of nights ago, and she kind of represents the modern kind of conservative view on race and on how racism kind of is not really a thing that they kind of pay attention to. And then there's another flip side of it too, where they play it back on liberals and they say, you know, you're the ones who are racist. You're the ones who are causing all of the racism that's happening within our country, and you're the one who's causing this dark divide. Here, I'll play you a clip of here, actually, let me load this clip up real quick. I'm going to play you this clip of Rick Santorum last night, or not last night, but the other night on when he was talking to Van Jones, and this is their explanation of how they see this racist issue. Hold on, and I don't mean they as in the other side, but as in a lot of conservatives.
Look on the other side of how a white person might see this.
Right.
98% of blacks voted for Barack Obama. 90-some% vote for Hillary Clinton. And no one talks about, wow, there's a racial issue going on in the black community.
That's not called a black lash.
That's okay. Yet the white community in the last several elections divided. Yes, votes a slight majority in the last election, not this one, but the last one, against President Obama. Race has become an issue. I would make the argument because President Obama has elevated the issue of race and really made it a much more divisive issue. I understand his sensitivity to that issue, but I think he has brought it on the stage and has not handled it well, and I think that's hurt.
I'm going to tell you.
Okay, so you kind of hear it there where this is becoming the talking point, as if, it's the problem of the liberals who keep bringing up these racial issues, who keep making everything about race, which is why race kind of persists, why racism is still so persistent within our society. And they don't necessarily kind of, like I said, go to the root of the problem. And now the right's kind of spiking the football because of the election results right now. And they're just kind of using that as a way to point to all kinds of conditions within black communities, mainly African American, and assert that they're pretty much just products of their own condition, or they're nothing more than pawns for the Democratic Party. And we're falling for it as suckers. Now, how do we dissect this issue from a logistical and rational standpoint, where we can talk about race and ways to get past it from kind of a point of view where we understand the history and evolution of it? Where is this racism coming from? Right? At least that's my point of view on it. Since the Donald Trump presidency kind of happened, there's been this movement called the alt-right, and it's been led by this guy. I think his name is Richard Spencer, and Richard Spencer went and spoke at Texas A&M a couple nights ago, and he's a devout, self-devout white supremacist. He no longer claims he's a white supremacist, but he pretty much, he has this belief. He holds on to this belief, this old belief, where he studied from these old German philosophers and things, people Adolf Hitler studied under, that asserts that Europeans, whites, the people from Europe, the people from the North, the Nordics, are just the supreme beings when it comes to Western civilization. Here, I'll play you a clip of what he said the other night after he got through doing his speech.
The fact is, only white people can support what we call Western civilization.
And here, I'll play you another clip he said here about how Donald Trump kind of inspired that in him.
Donald Trump as a potentiality was undoubtedly energizing. And what I mean by that is that the Donald Trump campaign was the first time in my lifetime that an identity politics for white people was on the scene.
So the point I'm making, the point where I'm going with that is that this ideology and this belief system has stemmed from years and years of evolution based upon the idea of a caste system, some sort of biological difference or social difference or cultural difference that is natural amongst the different races that separates us, right? Now, when this country, if you really want to talk about racism, I mean, we're about to hit a break here, and we're gonna skip our news of the day, and we're just gonna talk about this on the other side, because I still want to talk about this before we have our guest on. But if you really want to really talk about racism, you really got to talk about slavery and the history of that and kind of where it started. And we all know that slavery is an old practice. It goes back to before slavery is something that happened during the Agrarian Revolution. This is essentially when human beings stopped being hunter-gatherers, and we started using agriculture and having communities and things like that. And slavery was a way of paying off debts, and you can trade those debts in if you still owed a debt to the person that you were buying it off of. And so this is an old practice, and on the other side of the break here, we'll talk about how it evolved and how racism evolved when it came to the United States. We'll be right back. Mike Riley Now podcast. You are listening to the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network. Follow us by visiting MikeRileyNow.com. All right, y'all, and welcome back to the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network, MikeRileyNow.com, and all that cool stuff. So, just to pick up where we left off, I was talking about the history of like, slavery. And so, when the slaves first came here, when people were first brought here, obviously, a lot of people know there was indentured servitude. And, there's the story of John Punch, of how, 3 indentured servants ran away, 2 of them white, 1 of them black. They got caught, and the 2 white ones got, sentenced to, 20 or I think 10, 15 more years hard labor. But John Punch got sentenced to slavery for life. And ever since then, that's when the chattel practice started. Now, that's neither here nor there. But from that came the idea of the economic system behind slavery, where, cotton is king and the South kind of ruled that area. And they started a racial caste system where, being black is slave. Where I'm going with this is that black lives, black people at that point became the bottom of the evolutionary chain. Look at the notes from Thomas Jefferson. They're supposed to be this way. They're, dumb people. They're childlike. They're lazy, things like that. And Thomas Jefferson tried to abolish slavery. He tried to do it through legislation. He had this thing called the Free State Society, where he tried to send all of the free slaves over to Liberia, which is the only colony the United States ever set up outside of the continent. And this is in Africa. And they named Monrovia after James Monroe, which is the capital of Liberia. And they were supposed to send all the slaves there, but he wasn't able to get that passed. Abraham Lincoln tried to do the same thing, because they never looked at this as a country that they wanted to be set up to have blacks in it. They didn't necessarily agree with slavery, but they didn't like black people either, right? Okay. Civil War happens. All that cool stuff, right? Slavery's abolished, 1865. After Reconstruction was over, everybody knows the story of, Jim Crow, right? And that whole thing. And back then, racism was a little more in your face. It was a little more easier to call someone an N-word. It was a little more easier, to do things like that. I mean, blacks were terrorized in the South, which is why the Great Migration happened. And this was during, the 1930s and things like that, right? So we're going to fast forward a little bit further. World War II happens, right? Everybody goes and fights in that war. Now, World War II was a big deal. This wasn't some small time where, the entire world was at war. This is the biggest human conflict in the history of mankind. Humankind, rather. Blacks fought in that war side by side with whites. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a very smart man on the economic side, because he used the war to get us out of the Great Depression, with the New Deal and with things like that, and keeping everything made in the United States. That's where this idea of this manufacturing base comes from, because everything was made here. Everything from the seatbelt to the steering wheel, to the bullets, to the tanks, to the bomb, everything was made in the United States. Plus, we bombed everybody back to the Stone Age. When all the soldiers came back from World War II, they were able to accept the GI Bill. The GI Bill allowed them to, get an education, to buy a house, to do things like that, and they were allowed to be a part of this American dream. They set up this system of government working for everybody. Don't forget, a lot of the country were Democrats for a long time, including those in the South, the Dixiecrats. That's what they were called. And they believed in this idea of government helping everybody. That's where a lot of people get this idea from around the world. We had social programs that help people. We had the best education programs. We had good jobs for everybody. We had a good government. These are the days of Eisenhower, right? The only problem was there was one group of people that weren't a part of that dream, and those were the blacks, the former slaves, the African Americans that lived here. They weren't part of that dream, and they came out and said, we fought in that war too. Shouldn't we have a piece of this American dream? And that's when the Civil Rights Movement happened. Strom Thurmond was one of the first to make what's called the Great Split. This is when the Democratic and Republican parties really had their big split. You know, he hoisted that Confederate flag high above the South Carolina state capitol and gave the longest filibuster in the history of the United States Congress. Anyway, to kind of fast forward here because we're running out of time. Over time, Republicans, and they realized that this idea of racism can't come from just calling people the N-word all the time. It can't come from, you have to kind of code things a little bit differently because they realized that this wasn't working. When Ronald Reagan came along in the 1980s, you know, and well, even before him, Richard Nixon, there was this guy named Lee Atwater. And Lee Atwater was I think he was the chair of the RNC, but I know he was part of Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign. And he had this thing called the Southern Strategy. And the Southern Strategy was this way because to kind of get the Republican vote back because of all of the benefits and the things that were helping a lot of minorities. They didn't like the idea of that. You know, this Republican mantra of slashing and keeping people poor has its roots in racism. Lee Atwater admitted this. This was part of his campaign strategy. There's a very infamous clip of him saying this, and I'll play it for you right now, where he talks about how this is how you evolve the racist talk. And this was part of the strategy of the Republican Party during the Ronald Reagan campaign that was ran in 1980. Here, I'll play this clip for you right now.
Or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, it backfires. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying, we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing. And a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
So from right there, Lee Atwater, and this was something that he explained. This was the strategy that they were using. Was, you know, it's not socially acceptable to be racist anymore. It's not socially acceptable to go and call somebody a nigger no more. You can't do that type of stuff. But what you can do is you can sit there and say force busing. You can sit there and say cut and slash benefits, and they know that disproportionately affects poor people. This has become the evolution of the conversation. Now it's not so much, oh, you know, I'm not racist. I just think that, you know, those people they feel entitled. They should get themselves together. You know, the welfare queen kind of thing. That whole old mantra, that whole old conversation about it's not necessarily that I'm racist. I don't have those racist tendencies. I just have a specific set of conservative beliefs that are rooted within that area, slashing taxes and, you know, cutting benefits and cutting social safety nets, because who does that disproportionately affect over time? It disproportionately affects people of color. Now, granted, I have tons of Republican and conservative and white friends and everything else in between. And we have these conversations all the time. And one thing I can always say, one example I always use about this is for me to get past racism is a lot like getting past misogyny or sexism. Because I'm not a woman, right? I'm a man as far as I can tell. And I have no idea what it's like to be a woman. I don't understand. I will never understand that experience in my entire life. I'll never know what it's like to have to wake up in the morning and, have to deal with, oh my God, is today going to be the day that, I get sexually assaulted, or having to deal with specific emotions, or having to have that experience, having to carry a baby, having to have a menstrual cycle, for God's sakes. I can never imagine what that's like to go through that. And likewise, I tell a lot of my friends, that's the way it's kind of like to be black. That experience in this country is one that's unique. And it's unique because it's born and it's shaped from this history that I talked about a little bit earlier. This history of evolution from slavery to second-class citizenship, all the way down to being looked at as entitled. And this is a conversation that we're going to have to continue to have. All right, y'all. We got Peggy Moore on the other side of the break. This is the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network. We'll be right back. You are listening to the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network. Follow us by visiting MikeRileyNow.com. All right, y'all, and welcome back to the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network. I'm your host, Mike Riley, of course, and thank you for rolling with me this long. You could be anywhere else in the world right now, and you're here with me, and I do appreciate that. Please log on to MikeRileyNow.com and subscribe and follow us on the Facebook, Twitters, and all that. All right, cool. I am very excited. This is the third portion of our show. We have a very special guest joining us. All the way from the city of Oakland, California. She ran for city council there this past election. Unfortunately, she was not successful, but that's okay because she's going to continue on with her public service, and we thank her for that. We want to welcome Miss Peggy Moore. Hello, Peggy. Welcome to the show. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All
Thank
right,
you
we're
so
going to give
much,
you a little
Mel.
round of applause because that's what we do to our guests. Welcome to the show. All right, awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for being on. Really excited to have you here, mainly because I really wanted to talk about public service a little bit. One of the things I'm kind of adamant on is trying to get more of our youth kind of involved in the process and get them kind of more excited about politics and things like that. You just ran a campaign, and I'm curious to know, what was your strategy to like really try to get people involved in the process, to get people to get out there and vote, especially, our younger millennials who are a little more than less apathetic or not too excited about, politics, even though I know this was a high profile election. I'm just curious to know what's your strategy for getting out the vote or getting people even interested in politics in the first place?
Well, let me just say, what a great question. And, it's tricky when you're in a campaign, because when you're in campaign mode, what you're really trying to do is see who your voters are, who votes, who's already registered to vote, and how do you turn them out. And there's a period of time that you focus on getting people registered to vote. And sometimes most folks are like, well, why am I registered to vote? Doesn't mean anything to me. My life hasn't changed, blah, 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 And I think that you started off talking about being a public servant.
Yeah.
And I think from that space, for me anyway, it was the grounding space for me to feel a purpose, be a part of something bigger than myself. It's one of the greatest gifts that I've had the opportunity to experience in my life, by being engaged.
Right.
And what happens once you're engaged, that those life purpose stuff just starts showing up, and you start caring, organizing, deciding why you care, things that are bigger than yourself, and you just start showing up and you start blossoming.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of what happened to me.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what did you do when you ran across that, less than enthusiastic potential voter?
The first thing you have to do is just kind of listen and really kind of understand their pain and also their perspective, because it is very difficult out there. Change is hard to see. And sometimes that's because of the lens in which we offer. And also, we have communities that are still suffering. We're sitting in a housing crisis right now.
Mm-hmm.
The issues that are happening are real and every day. And if it's not happening to you as an individual, it's happening to someone around you or in your family. And if you don't see change over a certain period of time, you become somewhat jaded and don't understand the value of your vote and the action of voting and how we even got to this point to participate and contribute our name and our votes. So
yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a bit of like a disillusionary, but it's such a difficult thing for me because I'm a millennial and I have a lot of my millennial friends are not too interested in politics, or they'll get interested in it and then they'll go back to doing it, whatever it is they do, and it's really hard. It's really difficult. So
it's not a fast-paced thing though.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like watching basketball, right?
No, it's the consistency of voting. It's the consistency of this is what I did. When I turned 18, my first vote went here, and there's something about that. The more that you stay in it, the more that it just becomes a part of your purpose. It becomes a natural responsibility.
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Oh no, that's it.
Oh, yeah. No, there's always like that. No, but I'm just curious. Like, what were you always this way? Were you always a champion for public service and for change and things like that?
Yes. Not that I knew it at the time. I think all the way through high school and growing up, I'm the oldest child of my family. I think that if I stop to look back, I've always been somewhat of a leader in terms of presidents of my class, being on the basketball team and, being the choir director at the community church,
Right.
So I've always, never a cheerleader, but definitely the leader of the pep squad, right?
Right.
So I've always had this spirit of engagement and inviting people to fully participate. I don't know where it came from. I think my mother does it as well. But in my family, none of my people in my family are really political.
Oh,
and
wow.
you must understand that I'm born and raised in Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I did not have a political landscape around me at all.
Wow.
But I do think, being an African American, being a Black woman, and also being a lesbian, really kind of pushed my political action forward even more.
Right.
Definitely fighting being Black, being a woman, but then being a lesbian. It's different when you're in California in Oklahoma and Texas than when you come to California.
Yeah, I can imagine. Wow.
And how do you bring your whole self to the table? So so that kind of also sparked my my actions as well, my political actions.
Okay. Okay. Now, there's what happened in the election, right? And there's this like aftermath. Okay, we got Trump. He won. A lot of people are a little distraught about that. What do you think we could learn from this election? And even based upon your campaign, what can we learn from this election? What do you think would be the best step for progressives going forward? You still there?
I am.
That's one of those questions.
Because one of the first things that come from me is to kind of create a space of stillness. Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
And I also,
sure.
I'm kind of tricked up when you say progressive because that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
It does. Yes.
Especially being here from the Bay Area.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when I think in terms of individuals who are forward thinking and believe in creating a space for everybody. I think that we have to be engaged in this process. We cannot stand to the sideline. But I think we need to be grounded enough and kind of rebuild our strength, right? So that way, as we move into this next year, because we don't know what's going to come at us. What I do know is that some of the realities that people of color know are going to get real. More people are going to come out talking about how much they support Trump. What does that look like? They're going to feel more comfortable to challenge you. And I think that's a concern for me. We do have issues around race and equity and equality in our community. So how do we govern in a way that makes everybody whole and people don't feel left out? I think this presidency is really going to push that to the forefront more so than anyone else has.
Right. That we may actually have an adverse effect of more participation due to the Trump presidency.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. What had the city of Oakland could have used from your service, just out of curiosity? I know well, obviously there was that horrible fire that happened up there a couple days ago, and that was really tragic. And I mean, I don't know if that's an issue in the city itself, but I know Oakland deals with a lot of different issues, from housing to income inequality and things like that. What were some of your plans for the city of Oakland, and what are your plans for the future?
Well, so let me just step back and just really take a moment around the fire.
Sure.
It's really more devastating than we even know, because it brings up so much. It talks about a community of artists. It talks about housing. It talks about affordability. It talks about, are we in compliance around that stuff? But it also is something that's bringing us together as a whole community. It's going to be interesting. It's going to take a minute to heal around this, because we haven't had such a tragedy like that. And I'm talking about right up the street from where I live.
Oh, wow.
Okay?
Wow.
And I know myself, as growing up being a photographer, I found myself in some of those little warehouses as well. So it's something that's too familiar for us. But I think it's going to create an incredible dialogue. But I think what Oakland needs is a healing. And I think that one thing about our communities, we have more in common than not, but we stay focused on some of the small things that keeps us separate and divided. I think that with the Trump presidency, I think we will see more issues around race, because Oakland is changing. It used to be a 50% African American community, and now we're in the high 20s, 29, 27. So for folks who've been here for a long time, and this is their birthplace, they have a memory of some really greatness and family and culture and community, and they see that disappearing right in front of them, and that is scary. So how do we keep the essence of this community and not be displaced is real.
Yeah.
So I think that I am excited still about participating and facilitating conversations where we can see each other in our wholeness, and not just be coming at each other in a way that, so we have hills and we have flatlands, them and us. How do we get away from that conversation?
Sure.
And yet at the same time address the equity issues.
Yeah. I kind of have a kind of like an off question before
Sure.
we end here. The state of California just recently passed legislation, or they excuse me, or they introduced legislation saying that they were going to not follow much of the federal laws that are going to be coming up involving immigration when it comes to sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Oakland is a sanctuary city itself.
It is.
It is? Okay, interesting. What are your feelings on sanctuary cities and the implementation of some of these new immigration laws that are going to be coming down from the federal level?
That's my family, because my wife and I, we have a very diverse family. She's from Mexico. I mean, her family's is part Mexican, also white. So we're very, very diverse. And we're a sanctuary city. We want to protect our folks that are here. That's going to be our main focus here in Oakland. I think we're going to have to really pay attention to these federal laws that are going to come down, because number one, we weren't expecting them to happen. And I think we need to regroup and figure out, what does this look like? How does it play in Oakland? Making sure that we have all of our stuff together to take care of our residents here. We're fortunate in the Bay Area, because San Francisco, San Jose, we all kind of are sanctuary cities. And then across the state, is going to not deal with the federal. I just don't know what it looks like yet. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it feels like. And I'm anxious around it. And that's why I keep going back to the fact that as a whole community here, we need to be grounded. We need to get still. We need to be about our purpose, and we need to figure out as many ways as possible to come together.
Yes, absolutely. And that is the $1 million question, is how do we come together? There's so much kind of the division going on right now, and I know I kind of tickled with this a little earlier, but, what do you think we should do to come together? I mean, do we find common ground, or do we just...
Well, look, there's a practice that happens here, not only here. It's not even a practice. It's a way of life called restorative justice. It's the way in how we communicate with each other and how we see each other. And I think that one of the things I keep saying over and over again is we have so much more in common than not. The issues with a parent who's up in the hills, whose child is dealing with mental illness, is the same issue with the person who's on the flatland. Some of your differences may be resources, but the pain of watching your child go through that is real.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the more that we can begin to see our common good, the better we'll be able to make decisions collectively together.
Absolutely.
And so I want to find more places where we can come together. So here in Oakland, we do restorative justice. There's an organization called Our Joy, OUSD. Our school system here does some stuff, which brings it's a tool that allows us to deal with conflict, our feelings. How do we instead of having it all balled up, we can put it out there and maybe see each other differently as well. But it's a way of life. It's not a
It's like a one-sided thing.
No,
right,
it's not a one thing. It's like, how do I see you? How do I hold you? Where do I fit in this whole community?
Right.
How can I hold your highest good up while you're holding mine? How can I hear? So we got to go to some basic stuff. And so, I'm all about love heals is some of the best healing there is.
It is indeed.
But what's the practical ways for us to be able to fully participate? I think we know it. I think we just need to make a commitment to sit down and do it and let go of some old stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I really need.
I really do think, I think you really touched on something, because I think one thing that we as a community, not just as a local community, but almost, as a nation itself, we need to understand the idea of empathy. I think it's something that it's starting to, I don't know if it's a cultural phenomenon or what, but I think lacking empathy is something that's becoming so commonplace amongst our society, where it's easy just to kind of dismiss somebody. And I think that's something we need to get back to. So that's very well said. Peggy, I definitely want to thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure. Where can people find you? You got Facebook, Twitter, all that cool stuff?
I'm more for Oakland. I think that's my Twitter account. My Facebook is more for Oakland as well.
More for Oakland? Awesome.
My email is more for Oakland, more for Oakland, just a little bit more.
Just a little bit more for Oakland. All
just
right,
a little bit more.
We can use a little bit more of that all around. Peggy, thank you so much. God bless you, and God bless Brooke, and God bless my man Jonathan over there, and God bless all of you for listening. We want to thank you so much. Tune in next week. We will be back. Remember that we are all in this together. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You must get involved, and you must get informed. All right, y'all. We'll see you next week. God bless you. We out. You are listening to the Mike Riley Now podcast on the Young Angels of America Network. Follow us by visiting MikeRileyNow.com.